The snow had already begun to erase her footprints, swallowing the road in white silence. She lay half-hidden beyond the shoulder, breath barely fogging the frozen air, while Jack Turner drove on, until Atlas growled low in the back seat. If Jack had trusted the emptiness of the road, if he had dismissed that flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, if he had not slammed the brakes and stepped back into the cold with hands that still remembered war, this story would never have begun, and neither would his long-delayed return to life. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, comment Amen, and please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet heroes. Snow drifted sideways across a forgotten Wyoming backroad, the kind of cold that erased sound and color alike, turning the world into a narrow tunnel of white where only instinct decided who lived and who was left behind. Jack Turner knelt in the snow with the fingers that would not stop shaking, though he told himself it was the cold and not memory. He was 38, broad-shouldered even after years of isolation, his frame still carrying the disciplined strength of a Navy SEAL who had once moved through chaos like it was water. A short, uneven beard darkened his sharp jawline, and deep lines cut from the corners of his eyes down his weathered face, marks left not by age but by nights without sleep. Jack pressed 2 fingers against the girl's neck, feeling for a pulse that flickered like a dying signal. "Stay with me," he muttered, his voice rough and unused, as if words themselves had grown foreign. The girl couldn't have been more than her early 20s, slim and light in a way that made his chest tighten, her dark hair matted with blood and snow, lashes resting against skin gone frighteningly pale. There was a gash along her temple and bruising beneath her coat that spoke of violence rather than accident. Jack's mind screamed at him to move, to run, to leave before the shaking got worse, before the ghosts came back. Atlas didn't let him. The German shepherd, 5 years old, thick-chested and powerfully built, with a black and tan coat dulled by winter dust, stood pressed against Jack's side, amber eyes locked on the girl. Atlas had been trained once, long ago, overseas, before Jack brought him home and renamed him after the weight they both carried. The dog lowered his massive head and whined softly, a sound that cut through Jack's panic like a blade. Jack swallowed hard, tore open the old trauma kit he still kept under his truck seat, the one he told himself he would throw away every year and never did, and worked on instinct he thought he'd buried. He bandaged what he could, tilted her head, checked her airway, his hands steadier now that there was a task to drown out the noise in his skull. When he lifted her, she was terrifyingly light, and that was when fear truly took hold. He laid her across the passenger seat, Atlas jumping into the back without command, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and Jack peeled onto the road, tires screaming against ice. The dashboard clock glowed red. 18 minutes to the nearest rural clinic if the road stayed clear. "God," Jack said, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. "I don't ask for much. Just don't let her die. Please." Snow blurred into streaks as the truck fishtailed, Jack correcting without thought, muscle memory taking over where his mind threatened to fracture. Every shadow looked like movement, every flash of reflected light like muzzle fire. He talked the entire drive, to her, to Atlas, to God, voice breaking and reforming. "You hear me? You're not done. Not here." When the clinic finally appeared, a low building with a single glowing sign cutting through the dark, Jack hit the brakes and stumbled out before the truck fully stopped, shouting for help with a rawness that shocked even him. Inside, the night shift was chaos wrapped in fluorescent light. A nurse with tired eyes and silver-streaked hair, her badge read Mary Ann, late 50s, calm in the way only long exposure to crisis could teach, took one look at the girl and barked orders. A younger male orderly, thin and pale, pushed the gurney while another nurse ran ahead to clear a room. Jack stood frozen for half a second too long until Mary Ann grabbed his sleeve. "Sir, you need to let go." He realized his hands were still on the girl, fingers slick with blood. "She's breathing," he said hoarsely. "Pulse is weak. She took a hit to the ribs." Marianne nodded once, already moving. "We've got her." The doors swung shut, and silence crashed down on him so hard his knees buckled. Jack slid down the wall to the floor, Atlas pressing close, solid and warm. Minutes stretched until time lost meaning. When the doctor finally came out, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache, shoulders slumped from years of carrying other people's outcomes, Jack forced himself to stand. "She's stable," the doctor said quietly. "Internal bleeding, concussion, but she's going to make it." Jack nodded like he understood, then covered his face as something inside him cracked open. He didn't sob. He just cried, silently, shoulders shaking, tears soaking into skin that had once refused to break under interrogation or fire. He didn't know who she was, didn't know why she'd been left to die, and for the first time in years, that ignorance didn't feel like relief. Paperwork came next. No ID, no phone that worked, no memory, according to the doctor. The receptionist, a young woman with dark circles beneath her eyes, slid forms across the counter and spoke gently, as if afraid Jack might shatter. When the bill came up on the screen, Jack pulled his wallet out with hands that still trembled, counted the cash twice, then once more. $47. Everything he had left from the month's disability check after gas and canned food. He pushed it forward without hesitation. "That covers tonight," the receptionist said softly. "We'll need a contact name." Jack stared at the blank line, the pen heavy in his fingers. He signed his name, the letters uneven, a promise made without permission or preparation. When he stepped away from the counter, his wallet was empty, his hands still stained with blood that hadn't dried, and Atlas looked up at him with unwavering trust. Outside, snow continued to fall, indifferent and endless, while Jack Turner stood under the flickering clinic light and realized he had just stepped back into a world he had been hiding from, whether he was ready or not. Morning arrived thin and colorless, a pale Wyoming dawn leaking through the clinic windows like diluted milk, carrying with it the smell of antiseptic that turned Jack Turner's stomach before his mind could catch up. He sat rigid in a plastic chair across from the nurse's station, boots planted wide as if bracing against recoil, hands clasped until the knuckles burned. Atlas lay at his feet, a solid, breathing anchor, his black and tan coat catching the light, ears swiveling at every beep and hiss of machinery. The rhythm of the monitors scraped across Jack's nerves. Each chirp pulled a thread from the old fabric inside him, corridors overseas, field hospitals lit too bright, blood that never quite washed off. He swallowed and focused on Atlas's steady flank rising and falling. "Stay," he whispered, though the dog hadn't moved. The door opened and a nurse stepped out with careful steps, as if sound itself might shatter the morning. She introduced herself as Lena Morales. Early 30s, compact and strong, dark hair twisted into a practical bun, eyes sharp with a compassion sharpened by long nights. "She's awake," Lena said. "Disoriented, but awake." Jack nodded once, the way he used to acknowledge orders, and followed her down the hall. Inside the small room, the girl lay propped against pillows, color returning to her cheeks in cautious increments. She was slimmer than Jack had first realized, collarbones delicate under the hospital gown, dark hair brushed back from a bandage that cut a clean line along her temple. Her eyes, brown, alert despite confusion, tracked him with a wariness that felt familiar. "I'm Lena," the nurse said gently. "This is the man who brought you in." The girl swallowed. I don't remember," she said, voice hoarse. Jack stayed where he was, a respectful distance from the bed, shoulders squared but posture softened by restraint. "Do you know your name?" Lena asked. The girl closed her eyes, searching. When she opened them again, there was relief and fear braided together. "Emma," she said, "Emma Brooks." The name landed without echo. Nothing followed it. Jack felt the urge to fill the silence and resisted. He knew better than to crowd a mind still finding its edges. A uniformed presence appeared in the doorway. Deputy Tom Keller, late 40s, tall and lean with a sun-creased face and a mustache he had clearly trimmed the same way for decades. His eyes were calm, his manner patient, the kind of local lawman who measured people before words. "Morning," Keller said, tipping his hat slightly to Lena, then to Jack. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" Emma flinched at the word questions. Jack noticed. He stepped half a pace closer, not touching her, just placing himself in her line of sight. "She doesn't remember," he said quietly. Keller nodded. "Understood. Just routine." The questions were simple. Where she'd been, who she'd been with, if she recognized the road. Emma shook her head to all of it, frustration wetting her eyes. Jack answered when he could, where he'd found her, the condition she'd been in. He offered nothing else. Keller watched him for a moment longer than necessary, as if weighing the spaces between answers. "If anything comes back," the deputy said to Emma, softer now, "you call us. You're safe here." When Keller left, Jack exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The smell of antiseptic pressed in again, and the room seemed to tilt. Atlas rose, placing his massive head against Jack's thigh, grounding him. Emma noticed. Her gaze softened. "He's big," she said, almost smiling. "Atlas," Jack replied. "He keeps me honest." The corner of her mouth lifted, then fell. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, "for whatever trouble this is." Jack shook his head. "You didn't ask for it." By noon, the clinic hummed with activity, and Jack's instincts prickled. He moved to the window at the end of the hall, eyes scanning the parking lot out of habit he'd never unlearned. That was when he saw it. A black sedan idling too long near the fence line, windows tinted dark enough to hide faces. The engine didn't cut. The car rolled forward, slow, circled once, then stopped again. Jack's pulse ticked up. He memorized the shape, the way the tires angled when the driver turned the wheel. Atlas's ears flattened. A low rumble vibrated from his chest. Jack didn't look back when he said, "We're leaving." He signed Emma out against Lena's cautious advice, promising to return if symptoms worsened. "You're taking responsibility," Lena said, searching his face. Jack met her gaze. "I know." Outside, the sedan eased toward the exit as Jack guided Emma into his truck, Atlas leaping into the back with practiced grace. The black car followed for a quarter-mile, then peeled off down a side road. Jack didn't relax. Not yet. He drove north, away from town, toward the timberline and the old cabin he hadn't meant to return to with company. Emma watched the passing landscape, frozen fields, barbed fences, a sky stretched thin, and wrapped her arms around herself. "Is this safe?" she asked. Jack considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Safer than staying." The cabin sat tucked among pines, weathered gray, smoke curling faintly from the chimney Jack had lit before dawn. Inside it was spare but warm. A wood stove, a table scarred by years of solitary meals, a couch worn into comfort. Atlas did a circuit immediately, nose to the floor, tail still, reading the story the air told him. Emma perched on the edge of the couch, careful, eyes taking in details. "You live alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not entirely," Jack replied, nodding toward Atlas. He brought her water, soup warmed on the stove, hands steady now that the clinic was behind them. They ate in companionable quiet, broken only by the crackle of firewood. Night came early. As darkness pooled outside the windows, Atlas stiffened. His head lifted, nostrils flaring. He moved to the door, hackles rising, a low growl threading the room. Jack's hand went to the rifle he kept mounted above the mantel, not in panic, but with deliberate care. He cut the lights. The cabin sank into shadow. Outside, the wind carried unfamiliar notes. Oil, rubber, the faint metallic tang of something that didn't belong to trees and snow. Jack crouched, listening. Every sense tuned. Atlas sniffed again, then pressed closer to the door, muscles coiled. Jack felt the old calm settle in, cold and precise. Whatever had followed them had found the trail. Darkness settled over the cabin like a held breath, heavy and deliberate. The kind of night that erased distance and made every sound feel closer than it was. Jack Turner moved without turning on a single light, boots whispering across the wooden floor he had worn smooth with years of solitary pacing. The panic came in waves, first the tightness behind his eyes, then the ringing that blurred thought into static. He recognized the sequence and refused to let it finish. He slowed his breathing, counted the seconds between exhales, and listened to the forest instead. Atlas stayed close. 5 years old and built like a compact engine, shoulders rolling beneath his thick black and tan coat as he tracked scents only he could read. The dog's amber eyes reflected moonlight when Jack cracked the door a finger's width and scanned the tree line. Emma Brooks sat on the edge of the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket Jack had dragged from the closet. She looked smaller in the low light, slim frame hunched, dark hair pulled into a loose knot that exposed the pale line of her bandage. Confusion still clouded her eyes, but there was steel beneath it, an alertness that hadn't dulled despite pain. "You don't have to stay up," she said quietly, as if afraid to wake the night itself. Jack shook his head once. "I do." He handed her a flashlight and showed her how to shield the beam with her palm. "If you hear me whistle, don't move. If Atlas comes to you, follow him. No questions." She nodded, absorbing instruction the way people did when fear sharpened attention. Jack stepped outside and closed the door without a sound. The cold bit immediately, clean and bright, and for a moment the forest smelled honest. Pine sap, frozen earth, the faint musk of deer. He moved the way he always did when the world narrowed, measured, economical, present. He checked the perimeter first, then began setting the kind of traps that didn't look like traps to anyone not trained to see them. Wire strung low across a game trail, a pressure plate disguised beneath leaf litter, empty cans threaded on paracord where the wind wouldn't touch them. Improvised, yes, but effective. He placed them to funnel movement, not stop it. The goal wasn't capture. It was warning. Atlas ghosted through the trees, silent, tail low, breath fogging in controlled bursts. Jack murmured commands he hadn't used in years, voice barely louder than thought. Atlas obeyed, muscles coiling and releasing with disciplined restraint. The first sweep of light cut through the trees near midnight. Jack froze, crouched behind a fallen log, rifle steady but lowered. The beam moved with purpose, not the jittery arc of a lost hiker. Then another joined it, and a third, slicing the dark into pale corridors. The panic spiked hard enough to blur Jack's vision, memory crowding in, searchlights, shouted orders, the smell of hot metal. He forced himself to stay here. Wyoming, pines, snow. Atlas's presence grounded him, a living weight against his leg. 2 men emerged from the tree line, silhouettes against the snow. They wore hunting jackets and knit caps pulled low, gear that blended into rural night too easily. One was tall and narrow-shouldered, moving with nervous quickness, the other stockier, head swiveling with the confidence of someone used to having the advantage. Jack clocked their spacing, the way they checked each other's blind spots. Not amateurs. A third shape lingered farther back, keeping distance. Jack eased his safety off, then on again, choosing patience. Atlas tensed, a low vibration passing through his chest. Jack touched the dog's shoulder, a reminder. The men circled wide, testing the edges of the clearing. One paused, shining his light toward the cabin windows. Jack had cut every glow. The place looked dead. A minute stretched. Then the stockier man stepped forward, and the night answered him with a sharp clink, metal kissing metal. The sound was small but final, echoing like a dropped coin in a church. The man swore under his breath and froze. Jack's pulse thundered, but his hands remained steady. The men retreated a step, then another, beams jittering now. The third figure hissed something Jack couldn't hear. Atlas slipped from Jack's side like a shadow unfastened, positioning downwind. He didn't bark. He waited. The group withdrew, slow and deliberate, unwilling to commit and unwilling to leave entirely. When their lights finally vanished, Jack stayed where he was until the forest reclaimed its silence. He dismantled nothing. Instead, he doubled what he could, shifted a wire, reset a can. When he re-entered the cabin, Emma looked up immediately. "They were here," she said, not a question. Jack nodded. He poured water, his hands no longer shaking. "They'll come back," he said. "Not tonight." Emma swallowed. "Is it because of me?" Jack considered lying and didn't. Yes. He watched her absorb it, watched fear give way to resolve. "Then we shouldn't stay," she said. He met her gaze, respect threading through the moment. Agreed. He packed quickly, maps, food, spare clothes, keeping the load light. Atlas paced, energy coiled. They left before dawn, Jack choosing a route that doubled back on itself, then cut north toward higher ground. He locked the cabin behind them, not out of sentiment but habit, and erased tracks where he could. As the first gray light crept into the sky, Jack felt the night settle behind him like a door closed without slamming. He didn't know where they would go yet. He only knew staying meant waiting to be found, and he had waited enough for one lifetime. They drove through the gray hours after dawn. The world washed thin and colorless as if the night had wrung everything out of it. Jack Turner kept the truck steady on a narrow forest road that cut east toward open land, hands firm on the wheel, eyes constantly moving. The cabin was already miles behind them, but he did not feel the relief he expected. Atlas sat upright in the back seat, 5 years old and tireless, his thick black and tan coat catching stray light through the rear window, nose lifting every few seconds to taste the air. Emma Brooks sat beside Jack, bundled in his spare jacket, her slim frame still fragile, posture rigid with the effort of staying composed. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if movement itself might fracture something inside her. They spoke little at first. Jack preferred silence when his mind threatened to slip, and Emma seemed to sense that words, for now, would only stir what lay beneath. The road curved down from the trees into rolling scrubland, patches of snow giving way to frozen earth. Jack slowed near a cattle gate and cut the engine, listening. Nothing followed them. He exhaled, a measured release. "We'll take a longer route," he said. "Avoid towns." Emma nodded, then winced, a hand rising to her temple. Jack noticed immediately. "You okay?" Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the bandage. "I don't know," she said. "Something's loud." The headache came in pulses. Emma closed her eyes, breath quickening. Images forced their way through the dark. Bright lights, glass chandeliers, a room full of people dressed too well, music threaded with laughter. She saw her own reflection in polished marble, hair styled carefully, makeup chosen to look effortless. The memory shifted, fractured, hands grabbing her arms, the smell of leather and sweat, a van door slamming shut. She gasped, body folding forward. Jack was there instantly, pulling the truck to the shoulder, killing the engine, grounding the moment. "Emma," he said, voice low and steady. Atlas whined softly, pushing his massive head between the seats, breath warm against her cheek. Emma clutched at the jacket, eyes wide and wet. "I remember," she whispered. Jack waited. He had learned long ago that memory, once cracked open, moved at its own pace. Emma drew a shuddering breath and lifted her head. Her face looked different now. Still pale, still bruised, but sharpened by recognition. "My name is Emma Brooks," she said, firmer, "but that's not all." She swallowed. "My father is Daniel Brooks, California. He owns—" She stopped, a bitter laugh escaping despite herself. "Too many things. Construction, energy, land. People know his name." Jack absorbed it without comment, the way he'd learned to take intelligence reports that changed the shape of a mission. They took me because of him, Emma continued. A fundraiser in San Diego. Security was everywhere. I thought I was safe. Her hands curled into fists. They wanted leverage, money. When my father wouldn't meet their number, they decided I wasn't worth keeping. Silence pressed in after the words fell. Jack felt the familiar weight settle on his chest. The old equation his mind always returned to: protect or lose. Faces from another life flickered at the edges of his vision, men and women he'd failed to bring home. He forced the memories back down, focused on the present. They left you on that road, he said. Emma nodded. Drugged, beaten. I woke up in the cold. After that, nothing. Her eyes found his, searching. They'll come back. It wasn't fear that colored her voice now, it was certainty. Jack started the engine again and eased back onto the road. Then we don't let them, he said. He felt Atlas shift, a low sound of agreement rumbling from the dog's chest. As the miles passed, Emma's memories continued to surface in jagged pieces, names without faces, accents, a tattoo glimpsed on a wrist. Jack filed everything away, already mapping possibilities. He understood now why the men in the woods had moved the way they did. This wasn't random violence, it was cleanup. They stopped once more near a stand of cottonwoods to eat. Jack handed Emma a protein bar, watched to be sure she could keep it down. She studied him between bites. You don't ask much, she said quietly. Jack shrugged. Questions come later. She hesitated, then said, Why are you helping me? The answer rose easily and terrified him all the same. Because I stopped, he said, and because walking away is something I don't do well. By late afternoon, they were back on the road. Emma dug into the pocket of her jeans and froze. My phone, she said. I thought it was dead. She pulled out a slim device with a cracked screen. Jack's shoulders tightened. That wasn't on before, he said. Emma shook her head. They gave it to me. A burner. I didn't know why. The screen lit up in her hand, a single notification blooming into view. An unknown number, one message. Emma read it aloud, voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. You should have stayed where we left you. Now you've made this complicated. The road ahead stretched empty and unforgiving. Jack slowed, mind already shifting into motion. The old fear rethreaded into focus. He reached over and gently took the phone, powering it down. They know, Emma said. Yes, Jack replied. He met her gaze, unflinching. And now, so do we. Atlas barked once, sharp and decisive, as if punctuating the moment. Jack pulled the truck forward, choosing a turnoff that led away from the main highway. He wasn't running anymore. He was repositioning. Snow returned at dusk, thick and purposeful, muting the land until even distance felt unreliable. Jack Turner parked the truck beneath a cutbank and shut off the engine, letting the cold settle while his mind worked. He had chosen this place because it offered lines of sight and exits, because it narrowed options. Emma Brooks watched from the passenger seat, jaw tight, dark hair tucked beneath a knit cap Jack had found in the glove box. Atlas paced in the bed, breath steaming, 5 years old and all muscle and focus, the kind of dog who waited for permission to move and never forgot it once given. Jack checked the sky, then the ridge, then finally the phone he had powered back on only long enough to send one message. 2 words. Coordinates. The reply came 10 minutes later. On my way. They didn't wait long. Headlights approached without hurry, dipping once in acknowledgement before stopping well short of Jack's position. The man who stepped out moved like he'd never learned to rush. Caleb Ruiz was mid-40s, lean to the point of austerity. Dark hair gone steel gray at the temples, beard trimmed close in a way that spoke of discipline rather than fashion. He wore civilian clothes that didn't quite disguise the soldier underneath, jacket cut to allow movement, boots worn for work, not show. Years ago, Caleb had been Jack's point man overseas, the one who always found the cleanest angle through chaos. An explosion had taken his left ear's hearing and most of his patience with bureaucracy. He greeted Jack with a nod that carried history. "You look like hell," he said, voice even. "Good to see you too," Jack replied. They spoke quickly, quietly. Emma stayed back, Atlas glued to her side. Jack laid out what he knew: the cabin, the watchers, the message. Caleb listened without interrupting, eyes narrowing when Jack mentioned the tattooed wrist. "Same crew," Caleb said. "They use rural routes, temporary holds. There's a warehouse 10 miles east, old feed distribution. County tried to condemn it twice." He glanced toward the dark. "Sheriff owes me a favor." The sheriff arrived without sirens. Sheriff Ellen Price was in her early 50s, tall and straight-backed, silver hair pulled into a severe braid that matched her manner. She had lines at the corners of her mouth that suggested hard conversations and harder choices. She shook Jack's hand once, firm. "We keep this clean," she said. "No heroics." Jack nodded. He had learned the cost of heroics. They formed a plan that was less plan than alignment. Positions, timing, what to do if things went wrong. Atlas watched it all, ears forward, reading tone more than words. When Jack knelt and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's, Atlas leaned in, accepting the weight. They moved after full dark. Snow thickened, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred edges. The warehouse squatted at the end of a spur road, windows boarded, metal skin scarred by years of neglect. Jack took the high ground with Caleb while the sheriff's 2 deputies, faces young, movements careful, held the road. Atlas ranged ahead, nose low, tail steady, pulling Jack along a path that cut wide of obvious approaches. The scent was fresh. Men had been here recently. Jack felt the familiar narrowing of the world, the way details sharpened as a memory tried to intrude. He named what he could see: door hinges, snowdrift patterns, the absence of wind where there should be some, and stayed anchored to now. The breach was quiet until it wasn't. A door groaned, a shout snapped, and the night fractured into movement. Jack flowed with it, not fast but precise, covering angles while Caleb moved opposite, a mirror he trusted. Gunfire erupted. Short, sharp cracks that ricocheted inside metal walls. Jack felt the old tremor surge, the echo of other nights, other buildings. He inhaled through it, exhaled longer, and the tremor passed. Atlas shot forward on command, a black and tan blur that struck center mass of the largest man in the room, taking him down with controlled violence. The man went for his weapon anyway. Atlas locked on, weight and leverage doing what training demanded. A shot cracked close enough to burn air. Jack ducked, rolled, came up on a knee. Time slowed. He saw the shooter's stance, the tension in his shoulders, the way fear bent his aim. Jack fired once to suppress, twice to end the threat, movements clean, deliberate. The noise faded as quickly as it had come. Snow hissed against hot metal. In the sudden quiet, Jack realized his hands were steady. No shaking, no dissociation. The past had tried to take the wheel and failed. Sheriff Price's voice cut through the radio, calm and controlled. "Suspects in custody." Caleb checked Jack's flank, then grinned without humor. "Looks like you remembered who you are." Jack glanced at Atlas, who still held the downed man, until Jack touched his shoulder and said, "Release." The dog complied instantly, stepping back, chest heaving, eyes never leaving the threat. Jack knelt, meeting the man's gaze, fear there, and calculation. "It's over," Jack said, not unkindly. They cleared the warehouse and found what they expected. Temporary bedding, burner phones, maps with routes circled in grease pencil. Evidence enough to hold. Sheriff Price took it all in with a nod. "We'll finish this," she said. "You did your part." Jack didn't answer right away. He stepped outside into the falling snow and let the cold bite his face. The noise in his head had gone quiet, not erased but muted, as if someone had turned down a dial he'd assumed was broken. Emma emerged a minute later, escorted by a deputy, eyes wide but steady. She stopped when she saw Jack and Atlas together and let out a breath she'd been holding for days. Jack felt something loosen inside his chest. Not relief exactly, permission. Permission to stand in the sound of his own breathing without flinching. He knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Atlas's again. "Good work," he murmured. Atlas leaned into him solid as ever. Morning came with sirens and headlights, not the quiet Jack Turner preferred. Snow still clung to the ground around the county operations center, but inside the building the air was warm, bright and humming with voices. Jack stood near the back of the briefing room, Atlas lying at his boots, massive head resting on crossed paws, eyes alert. The dog's coat was still dusted with snow, his presence a quiet contradiction to the polished room. Emma Brooks sat at a table near the front, posture straight despite exhaustion, dark hair brushed back neatly for the first time since Jack had found her. There were shadows under her eyes now, but also something new, steadiness. The doors opened without ceremony, and the room shifted. Daniel Brooks entered, flanked by two men in tailored coats who moved like security even without earpieces. Daniel was in his early 60s, tall and broad-framed, his once dark hair now fully silver, cut short in a style that suggested decades of boardrooms and control. His face was lined deeply, not just by age but by long-held tension, the kind of man used to carrying the weight of outcomes. When his eyes found Emma, the mask cracked completely. He crossed the room too fast for a man his age, hands shaking as he cupped her face. "Emma," he breathed, voice breaking despite every effort to contain it. She stood and leaned into him, and for a moment the room forgot itself. Jack looked away, respecting a reunion that felt almost sacred. Daniel straightened eventually, shoulders squaring as he took in the uniformed officers, the evidence boards, the muted attention of cameras waiting outside. His gaze landed on Jack. "You," he said, stepping forward. Up close, the power in him was unmistakable, but so was the grief. "You brought her back." Jack nodded once. "I didn't do it alone." Daniel followed his glance to Atlas and surprised Jack by crouching slightly to meet the dog's eyes. "Thank you," Daniel said, sincerity cutting through his authority. Atlas tilted his head, unimpressed, then looked back to Jack. The briefing began. Sheriff Ellen Price laid out the findings with precision, locations, names, timelines, while images flashed on the screen behind her. The warehouse, the burner phones, the financial trail that led through shell companies to men who had assumed rural distance meant invisibility. Daniel listened without interruption, jaw set. When it ended, he turned to Jack again. "I owe you more than I can say," he began, "and more than I intend to say publicly." He gestured to a man at his side. "I can make sure you're taken care of. A position, head of security, resources." The offer hung in the air, heavy and tempting. Jack felt the old reflex, to disappear, to refuse attention, rise up. He pushed it down. "No," he said calmly. Daniel blinked. "No?" Jack met his gaze. "I want what you want, justice. And for her to be safe. That's it." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like respect settling into place. Outside, the press waited in a cold knot. Cameras rose the instant the doors opened, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Jack felt the familiar urge to step back, to let others speak. Instead, he stayed. Emma stood beside her father, chin lifted. Daniel addressed the crowd first, voice steady as steel. He spoke of facts, of evidence, of cooperation with authorities. Then he gestured toward Jack. "This man saved my daughter's life," Daniel said. "He refused payment. He refused protection. He asked only for the truth." The murmurs swelled. Jack felt Atlas shift, pressed his heel lightly against the dog's shoulder, a grounding point. When questions flew, Jack answered only what mattered. No embellishment, no retreat. The cameras caught his scars, his stillness, the way he did not flinch. By afternoon, the narrative had turned. Headlines reframed themselves, The same voices that had whispered speculation now spoke of bravery and restraint. Inside a quieter office, Sheriff Price slid a folder across a desk to Jack. "Statements," she said. "You'll be called as a witness." Jack nodded. "I'll be here." She studied him. "You handled that well." Jack exhaled. "I didn't run." It felt like enough. Emma found him later in the hallway, Atlas at her side. "Thank you," she said. Not the frantic gratitude of survival, but something deeper. Jack shrugged. "You did the hard part." She smiled faintly. "You stayed." They stood there a moment, the noise of the building distant. Jack realized he wasn't scanning exits anymore, not constantly. At evening, under a bank of lights set up outside the courthouse, Jack stood again, this time by choice. Daniel spoke, Sheriff Price spoke, and when Jack was asked to say a few words, he did. "People did their jobs," he said simply. "That's how this ends." He didn't hide, he didn't vanish. Atlas sat at his side, unmovable. Months passed, not with fanfare, but with the patient, almost stubborn rhythm of ordinary days, the kind Jack Turner had once believed were forever closed to him. Spring edged into the valley in tentative steps, melting the last hard seams of snow into thin silver streams that cut across the old running road behind the county park. Jack woke before sunrise out of habit, but now the waking did not come with a jolt of panic or the phantom echo of gunfire. Atlas rose with him. 5 years old and powerful as ever, his black and tan coat gleaming where winter had dulled it, tail thumping once against the doorframe as if to say the day was already waiting. Jack laced his boots and stepped outside, the air cool and clean, lungs filling without resistance. He began to run, not fast, not slow, Atlas pacing beside him with an effortless lope, the road familiar beneath their feet. The old reflex to scan for threats surfaced briefly and then faded, replaced by the simple awareness of breath, muscle, and motion. For the first time in years, Jack realized there was no noise inside his head competing with the present. Therapy had not been a miracle. It had been work. Twice a week, Jack drove into town and sat across from Dr. Helen Moore, a woman in her early 50s with iron-gray hair cut to her shoulders and a posture that suggested calm born of discipline rather than comfort. She spoke softly but never vaguely, her questions precise, her silences intentional. She did not flinch when Jack described the nights overseas or the nights after, when sleep felt like a trap. She taught him how to name the sensations before they named him, how to recognize the difference between memory and threat. There were sessions where he left drained and angry, and others where he left lighter, surprised by the unfamiliar sensation of hope. Atlas attended some sessions too, lying at Jack's feet, a living reminder that not all vigilance was fear. Emma Brooks visited when she could, no longer wrapped in bandages, but in purpose. She moved differently now, still slim, still elegant in a way that spoke of her upbringing, but grounded, her dark hair often pulled back simply, her eyes clear. She had returned to California to finish what had been interrupted, but she refused to let distance loosen the bond that had formed under pressure. With her father's resources and her own resolve, she established the Brooks Foundation for Recovery, a fund dedicated to victims of abduction and violent crime in rural areas where help often arrived too late. Emma insisted the first grants go to clinics like the one that had saved her life. She never spoke publicly about the night on the road without mentioning Jack and Atlas, though Jack asked her more than once to leave his name out of it. She always smiled and changed the subject. The ceremony honoring Atlas took place on a bright afternoon in the town square, modest by design. Sheriff Ellen Price stood at the podium, silver braid neat as ever, her voice carrying easily. Atlas sat at Jack's side, posture perfect, ears forward, gaze flicking only once toward a fluttering flag. When the citation was read, recognition for service, for restraint, for saving a life, Atlas accepted the attention with stoic patience, accepting a scratch behind the ear from Sheriff Price as if it were the true honor. Jack felt something warm and unfamiliar settle behind his sternum as applause rippled through the small crowd. He did not bow his head. He did not disappear into the back. He stayed where he was, hand resting on Atlas's broad shoulder, letting the moment pass through him without resistance. Life arranged itself around quieter anchors. Jack volunteered at the County Search and Rescue Unit, not leading, just showing up, offering skills when asked. He fixed fences for neighbors he had once avoided, traded tools and small talk, learned the cadence of names and schedules. Some nights were still hard. He woke once or twice with his heart racing, the old dream pressing close, but Atlas was there, warm and solid, and Jack remembered to breathe. He remembered that the sound outside was wind, not rotor blades, that the dark held trees, not enemies. On one such morning, Emma joined Jack at the trailhead, dressed simply in running shoes and a jacket that looked worn in the right places. "I wanted to see this," she said, nodding toward the road. "The place where you run." Jack shrugged, a hint of a smile touching his mouth. "It's just a road." Emma shook her head gently. "It's where it started to change." They ran together for a mile, Emma setting a steady pace, Atlas splitting the difference between them with easy grace. When they stopped, breath fogging in the cool air, Emma rested her hands on her knees and laughed softly. "I'd forgotten how good this feels," she said. Jack nodded. He had too. Later, as the sun climbed and warmed the earth, Jack returned home alone with Atlas. He sat on the porch steps, watching light move across the yard, listening to the ordinary sounds he had once tuned out. The distant hum of traffic, a bird calling, the soft scrape of Atlas's claws as the dog shifted position. Jack thought of the man he had been when he first drove that road months ago, the man who believed survival meant isolation. He understood now that saving Emma had not erased his past. It had reframed it. The skills that once kept him alive in war had kept someone else alive in peace, and in doing so had given him permission to live here, fully, without apology. As evening settled, Jack stood and stretched, joints loose, mind clear. He clipped Atlas's leash on out of habit rather than necessity, and started down the road once more. The sky burned gold at the horizon, and for a moment Jack simply stopped and looked. There were no sirens, no cameras, no demands. Just a man, his dog, and a quiet stretch of earth that felt finally like home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or fire from heaven. Sometimes they come quietly, on an empty road, in a broken moment, through a tired soul who chooses not to walk away. God does not always remove our scars, but He can transform them into hands that heal others. Jack thought he was saving a stranger, but in God's design, that single act of courage became the answer to His own prayers. In everyday life, when fear tells us to turn away, faith asks us to stop, to help, to love, especially when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith and redemption. May God bless you, protect you, and remind you that even the smallest choice can become a miracle.